Welcome to this HKA discussion on diversifying the technical team. I'm Sarah Keyte, an Associate Technical Director in the London office. I'm here with...
I'm Julia Humpage. I'm a Technical Director for HKA with a background in chemical engineering.
I'm Helen Collie. I'm a Technical Director in the London office with HKA and I am a structural engineer.
How did you get into working in engineering? Who or what inspired you? Helen.
So I was in my GCSE year at school. I had planned for a long time to become a vet. Then I realised I didn't really like blood. And then I had my heart set on studying classics. And then one day we had some engineers come into my school. They ran a programme called the Engineering Education Scheme, which I think still exists actually. And what it was the school paired with a firm that provided their graduate engineers to help do a project with sixth formers. And the one I did was about kind of temporary tensile membrane structures, a bit like the Millennium Dome, but a lot smaller. But we got to go into their offices and use software and see what everyone was doing and things like that. And at that point I decided that was something that I'd quite like to do. And so I applied to study engineering, and I actually went full on into it and did a gap year in industry as well with that firm. So that particular scheme worked out really well for me. And I studied civil engineering, became a structural engineer, and here I am today.
Brilliant. Wow. So someone inspired you. Julia, did you have the same experience?
No, not at all. My father's a civil engineer, or was. And so engineering was in the family anyway. It was something I was familiar with, not something that anyone at my school did before me.
Trailblazing.
Sort of, yes, it was a long time ago. But maths, physics, chemistry were the subjects that interested me most and that I was best at. So engineering was a natural fit for me. But then for choosing chemical engineering in particular, it was a friend of my parents who enjoyed his job the most and who actually had a good standard of living. So from the beginning, slightly money orientated.
Maybe I should have asked the civil engineers about their standard of living before I chose my career, but...
That makes sense. These are good answers. What's one perk or your favourite perk that you've enjoyed about being an engineer?
Well, so I guess part of the reason I went into it was because I enjoyed, same as Julia, physics and maths at school. I did physics, maths, A-level, alongside classics, just in case as a backup. But I really enjoyed those subjects, which you kind of have to have as a basis. But I also really enjoyed problem solving. So, and what I saw when I went to see these engineers at work and saw during my gap year when I was working was that being an engineer is about problem solving, and every day, because of that, every day is different. So, I think a lot of people have a view that we're sitting there doing calculations all day or doing a drawing and then doing calculations again. And actually the number of different things you get to do, even just as a structural engineer, but even in quite a niche role, the variety of things you get to do is huge. So, I've got to travel with it, and then from becoming exposed to a different area while I was in the States, I moved into forensic engineering, and that's brought me into the world of expert witness work. But there's just so many avenues that you can take. It can take you anywhere, and it's genuinely always or nearly always interesting. I mean, you do get the odd days where you are sitting doing calculations, but you're never doing the same thing for more than a day, I'd say, which is what I wanted.
Absolutely. Every day is different.
Yeah.
You get to work dynamically, you get to travel. I mean, you've worked with earthquakes.
Not with them. The earthquakes are genuinely working against me. But yes, no, I travelled out to New Zealand after the earthquake and did damage assessment work, and I think people don't think of those things as being engineers' work. I mean, I'm talking very much from the structural and civil point of view. Obviously, Julia, as a chemical engineer, it's the things that she does are completely different, but there are so many things that you end up doing. It's not just the extremes of like muddy boots on site, and it's not just sitting in an office either. There's just so many different things you can do. I mean, I know now the technology there's so much technology. I won't pretend to understand all of it. You do far better than me, Sarah, but you know, if you're into that, you can get into building design via computer science now, which is, you know, it's amazing. It's really interesting.
So Julia, do you have a favourite perk that you've enjoyed throughout your career?
Very similar to Helen, actually. So the variety, from studying chemical engineering, you can go into lots of different industries. You can go into food industry, you can go into water, you can go into oil and gas, which is where I went, and a whole breadth of industries. So the variety of doors that it opened, studying engineering, for me was really interesting. And then travel is a major one for me. So 18 months into my career, I joined a company who licensed technology for refineries and travelled the world. I started Monday morning at the office in Guildford, and by Monday night I was on a refinery in France. And I wasn't back in the UK for more than a couple of weeks at a time over the next 2 years, which suited me great at the time. Not sure I'd like it now, but so I've worked in America, I've worked all over Europe, I've worked in Taiwan. So there are lots of different areas. And one of those places I got sent to by that company was an oil refinery in Switzerland, who then asked me to stay on. So I then stayed and worked in Switzerland directly for that refinery for 10 years. So travel, the variety of industries you could work in, but then also something else you've touched on is the variety within your work.
The problem solving.
Not so much that, but the variety of how and where you can work. So I've worked in offshore design, onshore design, I've worked in an office, I've worked on an operating plant, I've worked full-time, I've worked part-time, I've worked shift work, I've worked office hours. So the variety is huge, and what I've found is I could always find something that suited what I wanted for that stage in my life.
And you've both gone through a variety of stages in your life, so as both mothers, would you say, sorry, I'm going slightly off script, would you say engineering's been accommodating to you as a mother?
To me personally, no. It has now. I found a balance now, but actually it was to the point when it wasn't, if that makes sense. So I think I had a particularly bad experience. Other people might not have that experience. As Julia said, you kind of had to find your flexibility, and some firms are better at providing that or not. I think things generally are getting better. I didn't have children that long ago, and it was very surprising to me that it had an impact on my career at all. Maybe I was a little bit naive. I thought we'd come a bit further than we had. But yeah, I found it difficult to work against the assumptions that were made about me because I had chosen to have children, and the assumption was that I had therefore chosen not to continue as an engineer, which wasn't at all my choice. So I didn't find it particularly accommodating, but I found a very good solution. I'm here, I'm doing exactly the work that I love to do. It's a shame that I had to kind of work past that, and it'd be great if women didn't have to do that in particular, because we tend to take the greater amount of time off, and again, that's hopefully, changing as well. But now, yes, and I think in a way the pandemic has helped me personally. I know that it hasn't helped everyone, but for me, in terms of flexibility, I can work at home. The type of work that I now do is very easy to do at home, and in fact helps being at home because it's lovely to be in the office, but it's so lovely that I end up talking to people and getting distracted, and when you have to sit down and write a report, sometimes you just want to be in the box room and writing.
Yeah.
So for me, it's worked out very well. I have more time with my family, but I'm still able to do all of the work that I want to do and fulfil the role that I wanted to be in. So I found a balance. I'm happy now, and I think things are getting better to where you can. I think, you know, it's very difficult if you want to be a site engineer and have children. That could be quite difficult. There are things that you just can't get around. Construction is very much 24/7. So as a structural engineer, if you choose certain routes, it might be more difficult. But you know, if people know about that when they go into it, then it shouldn't be a problem. And I think things are changing where employers are making more, I shouldn't use the word concessions, but things are becoming more open to flexibility than they were.
Yeah. So Julia, nothing ever stops you.
No, well, I wouldn't say that's true. But I had a very different experience, despite my children were born whilst I was working and living in Switzerland. And there was no paid, so legal paid maternity leave. Wow. So I had to ask for everything. And I was the first woman who worked at the refinery who'd gone back to work after having had a child. So, which seems incredible. As you say, in this day and age, you would have thought we'd come further, but I guess different countries have different evolutions, don't they? So I asked. I didn't have that much time off with each of my children, obviously with no salary at that time. That makes it a harder challenge. But then I did ask for flexibility when I came back, and I was given that. But it was very much an individual journey, and I think that's probably still the case for most women, is their journey around having children and then childcare is still quite individual. I do think the majority of companies I've worked at are open to flexibility now, and these are very engineering focused companies, so engineering contracting companies, and then here there seems to be a level of flexibility and openness to at least a discussion to see if a solution can be found to enable people, everybody, not just women, but everybody, to find the balance they need.
Absolutely.
So I do think things are moving forward. As you say, it's probably slower than we would think. And I from my discussions with certainly younger women colleagues, things aren't moving as quickly as they would like.
But as two of my role models and as a younger woman in the business, thank you for trailblazing the way. I think that's very warranted.
I mean, I will say I don't think that it's engineering by any means. No. That is, you know, that's the funny thing, is when you start to talk about stories like mine, you hear from all other women similar stories. So it's not like this, you know, this is engineering is the poster career for terrible treatment of women. I'm not saying that at all. I think the whole world has a long way to go, and everybody knows that.
It's not construction and engineering, but the issues are more prevalent, maybe, perhaps, because there's less women. So
I mean, exactly as Julia said, she was the first woman to go back to work after having a child. If you've only got one person, why are you going to build a policy around that one person? But I mean, you should to encourage more people, but that doesn't happen. And then the problem is exacerbated because women coming up don't see that as a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
They think, oh, well, the thing that you've got to do is retire after you have children. Well, that's an extreme situation, but I think it massively helps. I'm probably skipping ahead to like other questions, but I think it massively helps to have women to look up to see that they've done it in the past, and the lack of visibility of women in like higher management is a big factor on whether women choose to take a career.
Knowing that other women can move up.
That you can do it.
So we're going to move on to expert witness work now. So what attracted you to work in dispute resolution or as an expert witness? So I'll start with Julia.
Okay, so I've only very recently joined HK 6 months ago, and this is my first time working in dispute resolution and as an expert witness. And for me, it was about flexibility and the ability to take my 30 plus years of experience in engineering, in project management, engineering management, and find a different way to use that skills and experience. And I must say, so far, no 2 days are the same. There are days where you very definitely do need to be shut in a room and writing a report. And it can be quite high stress. I think when the deadlines are fixed and hard, and that can be quite a high stress period. But again, what I'm really enjoying here is the team and the people you work with, and that's something I've found throughout my time in engineering, is the quality of the people you work with.
Absolutely. So Helen, same question. How did you get into dispute resolution and expert?
So again, different route from Julia, but I, like I said, I was working in Chicago, and the company I worked for had a forensic engineering division. So I did some work in that division, and as it happens, got involved in a big legal claim where one of the directors was an expert witness. And I just kind of something clicked. I was like, I love this. This is what I want to do, digging around in millions of documents to find out what happened, applying technical knowledge, but applying also contextual knowledge of construction projects and things like that. So, I mean, that was a long time ago. So I then, I kind of worked in forensic work alongside doing design because I knew I needed to build up the experience. And then so I kept doing that. I kept getting more work in the forensic area, did a lot of insurance work, which is how I ended up in New Zealand. And then finally made the leap into expert witness work kind of full time, mainly because I loved it. I wanted to do it all the time. And it was actually very difficult to balance with in a consultancy where you're doing design. The business model is very different. But I wanted to do it all the time. I came to HK because they have, they've got all of the contacts via all of the different disciplines, really interesting projects. And exactly as Julia said, get to work alongside other people doing this same work. And the team is great. The projects that we work on are so interesting. We get to talk about them all the time. I really enjoy the process of it. I enjoy finding out what happened. I happen quite an odd engineer in that I happen to love sitting down and writing reams, as people will tell you, reams and reams, and then spending another day cutting it down. But I really enjoy report writing. I really enjoy that process of getting an argument down on paper very as best you can, and getting that technical knowledge across to people who don't necessarily understand it. Yeah, and communicating with an audience that's not other engineers. So I find the dynamic working with lawyers really interesting. I find the legal side really fascinating. I'm not sure I could be a lawyer.
Do you have a master's in construction law?
I do have a master's in construction law, and at one point I was like, oh, maybe I could be a lawyer. And then I thought, no, I'd be too sad leaving behind at my heart, I'm an engineer, which sounds
you're too brilliant as a problem solver and a communicator.
I just think I'd just miss it. I'd miss it too much. I mean, it was a big wrench when I finally made the decision to leave design. That felt like a big wrench, like, oh, I'm never going to look up and say, well, I designed that beam again. I mean, that's not true, because just to be clear, the things I designed are still standing up. So I can still do that while walking around London. But yeah, it was a big wrench to leave design, and I don't think I could leave the technical completely behind. So for me, this job is a perfect balance of technical, writing, legal, and and I'm really happy. It was a bit of a risk, a bit of a gamble to move into it, but I'm also getting to do things like manage teams of people doing the same work, and things like that. So I'm still getting to do a lot of the things that I was doing in design consultancy, just in a slightly different context. So it's
absolutely. And I find the QED, the quantum engineering delay plus offering, allows us to work with lots of people from a variety of different backgrounds. So experts, consultants, advisors from all disciplines, so working with quantum delay engineering seamlessly.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to see what other people do, the process they use and the things that they have to do. And that wasn't something I got when I was working in design consultancy. Even when I was doing forensic work, I couldn't see delay experts and quantum experts. It was quite, it was only if you had a project conference via the lawyers that everyone would get together, but it was quite disjointed, and it's quite nice to have it joined up.
That's absolutely fascinating. So my next question is about what personality traits or qualities have helped you succeed in your career. So I'm going to go to Julia first. I mean, you've got buckets of personality, so...
I guess it's maybe not highly politically correct, but a thick skin, I think, has helped me. I'm not overly sensitive to I guess, I don't know, can we say banter? Or what goes on around.
What people think is banter, but is actually...
So, and it can go too far, and yes, I am sensitive to that, but I do think a level of a thick skin, everywhere I've worked, women have been a minority. Generally, particularly as I've climbed the ranks, I've been the only woman in the room, and when you get to project manage, you're leading a team sometimes of 500 people, most of whom are engineers. And so I think a level of thick skin, the ability to listen. So this goes back to your problem-solving idea. I think it's about gathering the ideas from people, but then making a decision. Because at some point, a decision needs to be made. You need to move forward. And you need to resolve whatever the issue was. So I think maybe those two things are probably the two key, I would say.
No, absolutely. They definitely make sense. I think the ability to tolerate difficult cultures whilst you change them is definitely a quality. It shouldn't have to be a quality, but it's a useful one. Same question to you, Helen.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I would say I neither have a thick skin nor... Yeah, no, I don't think I do have a thick skin at all, actually.
You strike me as
someone
who's quite tenacious. You're definitely...
Yeah, I'm probably tenacious, but I'm not sure that's the same thing as saying I have a thick skin. So I think... yeah, I mean, exactly as you've alluded to there, I think this focus on resilience sometimes irks me because there's a part of me that just thinks, well, why should I have to be resilient all of the time? Because I'm not very resilient. Sometimes I just take things very personally and that's fine. But actually, for me, I think that's been a strength because I think a lot, and maybe this isn't politically correct either, but a lot of engineers are very, I'm trying to think of the diplomatic word, geeky. So they don't, I think my biggest strength is my people interaction. So I will quite happily move into a room that's a design team meeting, and I do have quite a lot of confidence, I'd say, which again I think is slightly different from thick skin, but I will quite happily just chat to people. And actually in both design and forensic work, chatting to people is a really important skill, because that's how you gather information, and it's how you might come to a solution that you wouldn't have otherwise come to if you just sat and worked it out on your own on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
So I think for me, my propensity to talk a lot has helped.
Well, you're warm, you're friendly, you're engaging.
Well, I like to think I'm those things, but I have the technical. I worked very hard. I think you have to work very hard to be a successful engineer. Because it's relatively competitive, and it's also relatively difficult. It's not easy work sometimes, and it's quite high pressure. Both the expert work is high pressure in a completely different way, but design work, but when you get to project director level, you're signing off drawings that are going to be built, and you have to have absolute confidence that everything's been done right. And so it's quite high pressure, so it's quite difficult. So yeah, you do have to be tenacious, and you do have to work hard.
But sometimes if a culture of a workplace perhaps isn't where it should be, sometimes you have to vote with your feet, that you have to accept that you can't change it, and they don't deserve to have you, maybe, is quite an interesting...
Yeah, I mean, you do. You have to have faith. You do. I think you have to have faith in your own ability, particularly as a woman. You do have to have faith in your own ability, because it will be... I mean, I'm sure Julia's had similar experiences. You walk into a room, you're the project manager or the project director, you've got 2 graduates with you who are male, and all the questions get directed at them. And it's just boring, actually. In the end, it's just really boring. So you've got to, but it could also get really overwhelming. So you do have to have faith that, no, I'm the project director for a reason. I should probably be the one I should probably be the one to answer this question, rather than, delegate everything. So yeah, you have to have a certain level of confidence, and I think maybe for women it needs to be higher.
Yeah. Well, to be assertive enough to actually correct someone when they assume you're the secretary, and just to correct someone when...
Yeah, I mean, I quite enjoyed that moment. I'm not the secretary.
So, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in working as an expert witness? I'll go to Helen first.
I mean, I'd say you've got to have the kind of design or whatever background experience to, you can't finish university and decide that you're an expert in something. That sounds obvious, but it's quite difficult to say what that level is. So I'm maybe not as experienced as some of my colleagues doing expert witness work, but I have a wide variety of experience, and I like to think I'm also very good at the things that make an expert a good expert. But I mean, forensic work, if you can get into forensic work, to know whether you like it, I think is quite important, actually, because a lot of people won't. I know in my last firm, we had design engineers, facade engineers, all kinds of different engineers and different disciplines, and some people tried out forensic work and they just didn't enjoy it. They just weren't into reading hundreds of documents and working out. They just wanted to design stuff, and that's fine. So I would try and find experience in forensic work before deciding you're an expert, because it is a specialist skill, I'd say. It's not the same as just writing down what you did or what someone should do. It's quite nuanced. So I think you need to be sure that you like it.
What advice would you give to someone who's interested?
So I think the first thing, and particularly for women, is forget the word expert. Expert has so many connotations that even myself, after 30 plus years in the industry, you think, well, am I really an expert? What does expert mean? I think forget that word. Do you have the experience, both technically, specifically, but also generally more project-wide, to understand what went on in a project or in a particular design issue, so that you can dig down forensically into it and take those facts and make an understandable story out of it. So it becomes something that non-technical people can understand, like the lawyers and the judges, etc. Because that's the skill, I think. Yes, you absolutely need a level of your individual discipline and experience within that, but then it is the ability to communicate that very simply. So I think if people are interested, try it. See if there is a way you can try it, if there is an area within your current firm, for example, that people can approach and try and do some work there to gain a better understanding. But it is a fascinating field because you get to see so many different projects, far more than you would ever work on as yourself directly.
It's a bit like being a detective, but also then having to take your findings and then explain them to non-technical people, which I think is really interesting, because if you can communicate and decode the complexity in something incredibly unclear, that adds value. So.
Yeah. My friends like to say that I'm a CSI engineer.
You are.
That's what they're like. Oh, how's the CSI engineering going? I'm like, it's good. No chalk outlines yet, but it is. It's a detective. It's a bit of a detective thing. I mean, the other thing is, I think once you've decided that you want to do it, you know that you think you've got the skill set and you've got the experience and you like it. Gaining that extra knowledge of law is really helpful because it gives you that insight into why is the lawyer asking me this question, what does it mean in terms of the claim, and if you've got that a bit more legal background, I found it really helped me to say, oh, I see why they're asking that, because if they can prove this, then that this will follow legally for them, and that bit is nothing to do with me and I won't get involved at all. But if I can see that that's where they're going, then I know what context I'm trying to answer a question in. And so studying construction law really helped me. I mean, I think it helps, but just on a professional level, lawyers see that you've got that. So I don't know, they see it maybe as a commitment to what you're doing, but they also know that you're in that sphere, if you know what I mean. Like, they're going to ask you a question and you're probably going to understand why. Whereas
so you can think like an arbitrator if you've done some award writing, so you can start applying.
Exactly. Whereas someone in design consultancy might not have that viewpoint, and they might just answer as an engineer, which can be great, but also might kind of misfire in terms of here's a lot of information and actually they only needed that bit. And so I think part of how I've improved is knowing which bit to focus on and knowing why I'm being asked a certain question and answering it appropriately. So the law study really helped me do that.
Julia, do you have any recommendations of resources or anything you want to suggest that helped you through your career?
Other women.
Other women.
Other women are what have helped me.
So you don't kick away the ladder, you help other people up.
Oh, goodness, yes. So I have developed, at one particular workplace actually, a very strong network of female, all of friends. We were colleagues, we're now friends, all were engineers, or are engineers, project managers. We've all gone slightly different paths since that time. But the support I think you can get from women, and we've all had different paths, some with children, some with no children, some with marriages, some with no marriage, so everybody's path is different, but the support we have for each other, for me, has been fundamental. And I think, particularly in a very male-dominated industry, which engineering is still, as a whole, so as an expert, it is still very male-dominated. As a company here, we're much more balanced, but within the expert work itself. So for me, that female network has been fundamental to my sanity and delight still in working in this industry, in the area.
So Helen, do you have any resources or you'd like to recommend?
Well, I mean, I think I would advocate mentoring as a big help to me. I have had both female and male mentors through my life. I worked for female directors for a time, and that was great because, again, it's that visibility of like, oh, well, that's a possibility for me. So that's great. But mentoring generally, and I know HK advocates it as well, is to try and set up, even without outside of your specific area. So just finding someone who even knows the ins and outs of the company. So just talking to people about, what does this mean in HKA is really useful, so that you can navigate to get over all those kind of obstacles that you shouldn't really it's great not to have to spend your time thinking about office politics and things like that.
Yeah.
I found mentoring a great guide through that process. And I don't know, maybe it's stereotypical, but I think possibly women, or like myself at least, office politics does tend to maybe affect us a bit more, perhaps because we take things a bit more personally. I think maybe that's a personal thing, but that's one thing of like navigating the workplace. Mentoring can really help with that, particularly if you're in a minority, so you feel a bit on your own already.
Yeah, absolutely. So I found both of those things. So a combination of mentoring, but also with the support network, just so mentoring to understand how to navigate it, and network how to cope with the perhaps imposter syndrome, the anxiety, but also just working out how to make it enjoyable. Just to make sure that you're enjoying what you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's really nice that you've got a network that is a network where I thought it was really nice that you said, we've had all different paths, and then mentioned like marriage and children. It's not just about what you do in the workplace. And I think a lot of workplace women's groups can have a tendency to just be like, well, we've set up a women's group, so we've sorted that problem out. And actually what you want is a true network of women who can talk about everything that, you know, and I think it's getting a lot better. As I said before, it's getting a lot better in terms of, you know, during the pandemic, I had like toddlers on my head on conference calls, like Disney films on in the background. You know, you couldn't get away from the fact I had children.
Absolutely.
And I didn't feel like it was out there, and I didn't feel like I had to be like, I pretend I don't have children because that makes me look more capable. Actually, you can be capable and have children. You can be capable and not have children. You can be travelling the world. You can just have all of these different things and still be a great engineer or a great expert witness or great manager, whatever you are. But I do think it needs you need a network of women to remind you of that sometimes.
I think the way I heard you describe it, Julia, you're an engineer first, and you just happen to be a woman.
In the workplace, yes, I think, and so sometimes the label or the focus on women in engineering is a bit much for me, but that's me, that's my journey, and I get that my journey is different and has been different to lots of other women's, and I think that's one of the issues, is every person's journey is individual, and women's journeys sometimes are similar and similar experiences, but lots of individual that only you know quite what's happened and what you want from it, because what we want is different too.
Yeah. I mean, I'd agree. I think it can get a bit much when it's constantly talking about, what's it like to be a woman in engineering? You know, it's a bit boring when people go, that's an unusual career choice. Is it really? Because it wouldn't be if I was a man.
No.
It'd be lovely to think that at some point, I have 2 daughters, they'd said, I'd like to be an engineer, and everyone went, that's great. And that was the end of the sentence. But at the minute, it's still, that's great. That's quite unusual, isn't it? So, and it's just a bit like, yeah, it is, but it doesn't really need to be. There's no reason for it to be at all.
Yeah, it shouldn't need to be additionally interesting because of your gender.
Yeah, it's just what you chose to do.
Absolutely. But my favourite colleagues are ones where they don't remind you about anything. So they don't remind you about anything other than the work. So that you are just a team. And it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. It's entirely meritocratic. So,
I mean, that's the way. Yeah, that's entirely the way it should be.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any difference. At all.
Brilliant. It's brilliant.
That's the dream.
That's the dream. Let's make it happen. It's not a dream. Let's make it happen. Let's make it a reality. So, thank you so much for your time. This has been brilliant.
Pleasure, Sarah, and lovely chatting with both of you.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting discussion. Thanks.